I never expected that a broken appliance would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. For years, my world was a carefully curated space, a quiet sanctuary built for one. It was predictable, it was safe, and if I was being honest with myself, it was profoundly lonely. Then a man I barely knew knocked on my door with a basket of wet clothes, and the walls I had so carefully constructed began to feel less like a fortress and more like a cage. My name is Lucas. At the time, I was 27, and my primary companions were a temperamental ficus tree and the glowing screen of my graphics tablet. I worked from home as a freelance illustrator, a job that suited my introverted nature perfectly. My apartment was on the third floor of an old brick building that groaned in the winter and smelled of dust and old wood in the summer. It was small, but it was mine. Every book on the shelf, every print on the wall, was a reflection of me. My routine was my religion. Wake up, coffee, work, lunch, work, dinner, maybe a movie, sleep. It was a loop, a comfortable and sterile cycle that kept the more chaotic parts of life at a safe distance. I liked observing the world more than I liked participating in it. From my window, I had a decent view of the courtyard and the comings and goings of my neighbors. I knew who got takeout every Friday, who had a secret smoking habit, who was always arguing with their partner. It was like watching a silent film. I could see the drama, the joy, the mundane moments, but I never had to hear the dialogue or feel the consequences. I was a spectator in the lives of others, and for a long time, that was enough for me. Then Caleb moved into 2B, the apartment across the hall. I first saw him hauling a ridiculously oversized armchair up the stairs with another guy, both of them laughing and sweating through their shirts. He was noticeable. It wasn't just that he was handsome in a rugged, unassuming way, with broad shoulders and arms that looked like they could fix anything. It was the energy that seemed to radiate from him. He moved with a purpose and a confidence that I found both intimidating and deeply fascinating. He had dark, unruly hair that fell into his eyes, and a smile that seemed to reach them every single time. Whenever we passed in the hallway, he would give me a nod and a genuine, "Hey, man, how's it going?" My response was usually a mumbled, "Good, you." Before I quickly fumbled for my keys and escaped into my apartment, my heart doing a little stutter step in my chest. From my observations, he seemed to be the complete opposite of me. He had friends over on the weekends, the low thrum of music and laughter seeping through the floor. He worked in construction, I think, often coming home dusted with sawdust, his work boots leaving faint prints on the welcome mat. In my mind, he was a charter member of a club I could never join. The club of easy smiles, casual confidence, and uncomplicated masculinity. I assumed, of course, that he was straight. It was the safest assumption, the one that kept my daydreams from getting too ambitious. He was just the handsome, friendly guy across the hall. An interesting character in my silent movie, nothing more. I was content to watch him from my window, to appreciate him from a distance, like a piece of art in a museum. I never imagined I would ever be part of the exhibit. Life has a funny way of forcing your hand, though, doesn't it? It waits until you're perfectly settled in your comfortable little rut, and then it sends a torrential downpour just to see what you'll do. That's what happened one Tuesday in October. The sky had been threatening all day, a heavy gray blanket pulled low over the city. By evening, the threat had made good on its promise. Rain hammered against my window panes, and the wind howled a mournful song through the old building's corridors. I was curled up on my couch, sketching on my tablet, feeling cozy and safely removed from the storm outside. And then I heard a knock on my door. It wasn't the tentative rap of a delivery person or the sharp knock of the landlord. It was a solid, hesitant thump. My first instinct was to ignore it. No one ever knocked on my door unexpectedly. But then it came again, a little more insistent this time. With a sigh, I paused my work and padded to the door, peering through the peephole. My breath hitched. It was Caleb. He was standing there, soaked to the bone, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, rain dripping from his nose. He was holding a large, overflowing laundry basket. I opened the door a crack, my heart already starting its frantic rhythm. "Hey," I managed, my voice sounding rusty. "Hey man, so sorry to bother you," he said, and I could see he was shivering slightly. His t-shirt was clinging to him, and for a split second, I forgot how to form words. This is a super weird question, but, my dryer just died. Like, completely kaput. Mid-cycle, he gestured down at the basket of damp clothes. I've got my work stuff in here, and I desperately need it for tomorrow morning. I was just wondering, and it's totally cool if not, if I could maybe hang some of it in your place to dry. My mind went completely blank. My safe, quiet, meticulously ordered apartment. His wet, chaotic, overwhelmingly masculine presence. His clothes. In my space. It was a collision of worlds I had never anticipated. All my self-preservation instincts were screaming at me to make an excuse. My place is a mess. I'm busy. I have a rare, airborne allergy to other people's laundry detergent. But looking at him standing there, looking so earnest and apologetic and cold, the word no just wouldn't form. Oh, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Yeah, sure. Of course, come in. I opened the door wider, and he stepped inside, bringing the storm with him. The smell of rain and damp cotton filled my small entryway, a scent so alien in my hermetically sealed world. He offered a grateful, dripping smile. You're a lifesaver, man. Seriously, I was about to try the oven, and I don't think my boss would appreciate me smelling like a baked potato. I let out a nervous laugh that sounded more like a cough. No problem, I said, gesturing vaguely toward my living room. My apartment's not that big, but we can probably find some space. Anything is better than nothing, he said, his eyes scanning my apartment. I suddenly saw it through his perspective. The stacks of art books, the half-finished canvases leaning against the wall, the collection of strange little plants on the windowsill. It felt intensely personal, like he was reading pages from my diary. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of vulnerability. My spectator days were officially over. He was here, in my world, and his laundry was about to be hanging from my ceiling. Let me explain something about my apartment. It was, for lack of a better word, my shell. Every object had its place. Every surface was curated to create a sense of calm and order. It was the physical manifestation of my internal need for control. Caleb's presence, along with his basket of dripping clothes, was a wonderful, terrifying disruption to that order. He set the basket down on my floor, leaving a small puddle on the hardwood, and I had to physically restrain myself from running to get a paper towel. I have one of those collapsible drying racks, I offered, my voice still a little shaky. I pulled it out from its hiding spot behind a bookshelf. It was a flimsy, sad-looking thing that I used for the occasional hand-wash sweater. It looked completely inadequate for the mountain of clothes in his basket. Caleb chuckled. That's a start, he said, his smile warm and genuine. Don't worry, I'll do all the work. He began pulling out clothes, and my small living room was suddenly filled with the scent of his laundry detergent. It was a clean, simple smell, something like fresh linen and maybe a hint of cedar. It was so different from my own unscented, hypoallergenic everything. It was the scent of another person's life, and it was weaving itself into the fabric of my own. As he started draping shirts and socks over the flimsy rack, we fell into a surprisingly easy rhythm of small talk. I asked about his work, and he explained that he was a custom carpenter, currently working on a big renovation project downtown. He talked about wood grains and joinery with a passion that was captivating. I found myself relaxing, leaning against the doorframe of my kitchen, watching him work. He moved with an efficiency and grace that I admired. His hands, which I'd noticed before were calloused, were surprisingly deft as he clipped socks to the rack. Then his eyes landed on the large illustration I had pinned to a corkboard on the wall. It was a piece I was working on for a children's book, a detailed fantasy scene with a forest of glowing mushrooms. I always felt self-conscious about my work, especially the more whimsical stuff. Wow, he said, pausing with a wet pair of jeans in his hand. Did you do that? I felt a flush creep up my neck. Yeah, it's, just a project I'm working on. He took a step closer, genuinely studying it. That's incredible, he said, his voice quiet with what sounded like real admiration. The detail and the lighting, it feels alive. Like you could just step into it. No one had ever described my work like that before. My clients talked about color palettes and deliverables. My parents called it nice, but Caleb saw it. He actually saw what I was trying to do. It was in that moment that the carefully constructed image I had of him, the loud, sporty, construction guy, began to crumble. There was a depth to him, a thoughtfulness, that I hadn't expected. This was his moment of vulnerability, in a way. He was revealing a part of himself that didn't fit the simple archetype I had created for him. Thanks, I said, my voice soft. It's for a children's book. That makes sense, he nodded, turning back to his laundry. It has that kind of magic to it. We worked in a comfortable silence for a few minutes after that, the only sounds being the soft squish of damp fabric and the drumming of the rain against the glass. He was hanging up a dark blue t-shirt, and as he reached over the rack, the back of his hand brushed against mine. It was a small, fleeting touch, completely accidental, but it sent a jolt through my entire system. It was like a static shock, sharp and startling. My skin tingled where he had touched me. I pulled my hand back quickly, probably too quickly. I risked a glance at him, but he was focused on smoothing a wrinkle out of the shirt, his expression unreadable. Did he feel it? Was it just me? My mind started racing, analyzing the moment, replaying that split second of contact. It was such a small thing, a tiny, insignificant moment in the grand scheme of things. But for me, it was everything. It was a spark in the quiet darkness of my routine. It was the first hint of a connection that felt more real than anything I had experienced in a very long time. The drying rack was full, but the laundry basket was still half full. Caleb was holding up a pair of heavy canvas work pants and a thick, hooded sweatshirt. They were far too heavy for my flimsy little rack. He looked around my apartment, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know," he said, a slow smile spreading across his lips, "I have an idea. If you don't mind me getting a little creative." Before I could respond, he had disappeared back into his own apartment and returned a moment later with a coil of rope and a couple of small hooks. My eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Okay," I said, a nervous laugh escaping me. "I'm intrigued. I do this at campsites sometimes," he explained, already scanning the walls of my living room. "We just need 2 solid anchor points. We can string a line across the room. It'll be way sturdier." He pointed to the high corners of the room. "There, and there would be perfect." I was a little hesitant about putting hooks in my walls, but watching him, so confident and capable, I found myself just nodding along. "Okay, let's do it." He grabbed one of my dining chairs to stand on. "Just need you to spot me," he said, handing me the other end of the rope. My job was simple: hold the rope taut while he secured the first hook. But it meant I had to stand close. So close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. So close I could see the individual raindrops still clinging to his eyelashes. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. He screwed the first hook into the wall with a few quick, powerful twists of his wrist. He was surprisingly graceful for such a big guy. He stepped down from the chair and moved it to the other side of the room. "All right, a little more tension," he instructed as he climbed up again. I pulled the rope tighter, my knuckles white. He reached up, the fabric of his damp shirt stretching tight across his back, and for a moment, I just stared. And then it happened. As he was twisting the second hook into place, the old wooden chair wobbled beneath him. Just for a second, his body lurched, a grunt of surprise escaping his lips. His arm flailed out instinctively, searching for something, anything, to grab onto for balance. And what it found was my shoulder. His weight, combined with the sudden movement, was too much. Time seemed to slow down. I saw his eyes widen in alarm as he started to fall, his hand gripping my shirt. He was pulling me down with him. There was no time to think, no time to react. It was a tangle of limbs and a shared gasp for air. We crashed onto my small sofa, which was thankfully right behind us. We landed in a heap. The air was knocked from my lungs in a sharp whoosh. When I could finally breathe again, I became acutely aware of our position. I was lying on my back, pinned against the cushions, and Caleb was sprawled half on top of me. His chest was pressed against mine, one of his legs tangled with my own. His face was just inches from mine. I could feel the heat of his skin through our damp shirts, the solid weight of him, the frantic beat of his heart echoing my own. Neither of us moved. We just stayed there, frozen, breathing in the same small pocket of air. His eyes, a warm and surprising shade of hazel, were wide, searching mine. The whole world seemed to shrink down to the space between us. The sound of the rain outside faded away. The scent of his laundry detergent was all-encompassing. I could see the tiny flecks of gold in his irises, the slight tremble in his hand that was still resting on my chest. In that moment, there were no assumptions, no walls, no safe distances. There was just the undeniable, electrifying reality of his closeness. It was terrifying and exhilarating and more intimate than anything I had ever known. He had reached for balance and had, in the process, completely upended my world. He had literally pulled me down, and in doing so, he had lifted a veil. I looked into his eyes and saw not just the friendly neighbor from across the hall, but a man who was looking back at me with an intensity that stole the breath right out of my lungs. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions, and I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that nothing would ever be the same again. The moment stretched for what felt like an eternity, but it must have only been a few seconds. Caleb was the first to break the spell. He scrambled off me, his movements sudden and awkward, as if he'd just realized he was touching something hot. "Oh my God, man, I am so sorry," he stammered, running a hand through his wet hair. The chair just... "I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" I pushed myself into a sitting position, my body buzzing with a strange, nervous energy. "I'm fine," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant and thin. "Totally fine. Don't worry about it." But I wasn't fine. My mind was a chaotic storm of sensation and confusion. The imprint of his body was still warm against mine. The air in the room had changed. The easy comfort we had started to build was gone, replaced by a thick, humming tension. It was like a string had been pulled taut between us, and we were both terrified of it snapping. Caleb avoided my gaze, focusing instead on the now-hanging clothesline. "Well, the line's up," he said, his voice unnaturally loud in the quiet room. He quickly hung the last few heavy items, his movements stiff and deliberate. When he was finished, he gathered his empty laundry basket. "Okay, well," he said, inching toward the door. "I should, let you get back to your night. Thanks again. For everything. You're a lifesaver." "It's no problem," I said, staying rooted to the sofa. I couldn't bring myself to walk him to the door. I felt too exposed, too raw. I just nodded. He gave a quick, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, and then he was gone, the click of my apartment door sounding like a gunshot in the silence. I was left alone in my living room, which was now draped with his clothes. His scent lingered in the air, a ghost of the intimacy we had just shared. I slowly lay back down on the couch, right where we had fallen, and stared up at the ceiling. My mind went into overdrive. I replayed the fall, the landing, the long, silent moment 1,000 times. I dissected every detail. The way his eyes had darkened, the way his breath had hitched, the way his hand had felt so heavy and warm on my chest. Was I imagining it? Did I project my own feelings onto a simple accident? He had apologized so profusely, had been so quick to pull away. That probably meant it was nothing to him, right? Just an embarrassing, klutzy moment. But then I would remember the look in his eyes. There was something there beyond just surprise. A flicker of something else. Recognition? Curiosity? Was it possible that he felt that spark too? Hope is a dangerous and persistent weed. It can grow in the most barren soil. A tiny seed of it began to sprout in my chest, and it terrified me. Because if I was wrong, the fall from that hope would be so much worse than the clumsy tumbleweed just taken onto the couch. The next day was torture. His clothes were a constant, taunting reminder of what had happened. I tried to work, but I kept staring at his gray hoodie hanging near my window, imagining him wearing it. Every creak in the hallway made me jump, thinking it was him coming to retrieve his things. I considered just leaving the clothes outside his door to avoid another interaction, but that felt childish and cowardly. So I waited, my stomach in knots, my apartment feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a waiting room. I spent hours overthinking everything. Maybe he was just being nice because he needed a favor. Maybe he felt obligated to be friendly. The confident, outgoing carpenter I thought he was would never be interested in someone like me, a quiet, anxious artist who preferred the company of his own thoughts. The fall was an accident. The look was a figment of my imagination. I was building a fantasy out of a simple, awkward mishap. By late afternoon, I had successfully convinced myself to bury that tiny seed of hope under an avalanche of self-doubt. It was safer that way. Late that evening, there was another knock on the door. My heart leaped into my throat. I knew it was him. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my shirt, and tried to arrange my face into an expression of casual indifference. I opened the door. There he was, looking just as nervous as I felt. He was wearing a different shirt, but his hair was still endearingly messy. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "Came to get my stuff. Is it dry?" "Yeah, mostly," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. "Come on in." The silence was even more pronounced than the night before. He moved through the apartment, carefully taking his clothes down from the line and the rack, folding them with a neat precision that surprised me. I just stood there, leaning against the kitchen counter, watching him. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but my throat felt tight and dry. He folded the last shirt and placed it in his basket. Then he stopped. He didn't turn to leave. He just stood in the middle of my living room, his back to me, for a long moment. Finally, he took a deep breath and slowly turned around to face me. His expression was serious, his brow furrowed. "Lucas," he started, and the sound of my own name on his lips sent a shiver through me. "Look, can we talk for a second? About yesterday." My stomach did a flip. "There's nothing to talk about," I said quickly, defensively. "It was an accident. Don't worry about it." "That's the thing," he said, taking a small step closer. "It wasn't. I mean, the fall was an accident. A clumsy, stupid accident. But everything else wasn't." I just stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He let out a shaky breath, a wry smile touching his lips. "My dryer isn't broken," he said softly. The words hung in the air between us. I blinked, trying to process what he had just said. My dryer isn't broken. The entire premise for him being here, for this whole strange, wonderful, nerve-wracking situation, was a lie. My mind reeled. Why would he lie about that? He must have seen the confusion on my face, because he rushed to explain. "I've seen you," he said, his gaze intense and unwavering. "In the hallway, through your window when you're drawing. I've wanted to talk to you for weeks, since the day I moved in. But I couldn't figure out how. You always seemed so in your own world. And I'm not great at this stuff. I get nervous." He nervous? The confident, easygoing Caleb was nervous? It didn't compute. "So last night," he continued, "when the storm started, I saw my chance. I thought it was a decent excuse. A little weird, maybe, but better than just knocking on your door with nothing to say. I just wanted a reason to be in the same room with you for more than 10 seconds. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me, his eyes full of a vulnerability that mirrored my own. "And then I fell on you, and it got so weird and intense, and I freaked out. I ran away like an idiot. But I've been thinking about it all day, about that moment on the couch. And I'm really hoping I wasn't the only one who felt something." The tiny seed of hope I had tried so hard to bury burst through the soil, blooming instantly and radiantly in my chest. He felt it too. It wasn't in my head. All the anxiety, all the overthinking, it all just melted away, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated relief. A slow smile spread across my face. I couldn't help it. "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You weren't the only one." The relief that washed over his face was beautiful. It was like watching the sun break through the clouds after a long storm. He took another step closer, closing the remaining distance between us. He gently took the laundry basket from his own hands and set it on the floor, never breaking eye contact with me. "Good," he breathed out. He raised a hand, his movements slow and deliberate, as if asking for permission. He gently cupped my cheek, his thumb stroking softly against my skin. His hand was warm and slightly rough from his work, and the simple touch was the most incredible thing I had ever felt. "Because I really want to kiss you right now, Lucas. Is that okay?" I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded, my eyes fluttering shut. And then he leaned in, and his lips met mine. It wasn't a clumsy, accidental fall. It was deliberate and gentle and sure. It was a kiss that tasted of relief and fresh laundry and the promise of something new and terrifyingly wonderful. It was the end of my silent movie and the beginning of a story I never would have dared to write for myself. The weeks that followed that first kiss felt like waking up from a long, quiet dream. My world, which had once been painted in muted grays and beiges, was suddenly exploding with color. Caleb's presence became a natural and essential part of my life, as necessary as the coffee I brewed every morning. We spent hours just talking, unraveling the stories of our lives for each other on my comfortable, now famous sofa. I learned that his confidence was a well-practiced shield for a deep-seated sensitivity, and that his love for building things with his hands came from a desire to create lasting, beautiful things in a world that often felt temporary. He, in turn, learned about the quiet worlds I built in my illustrations, the anxieties that kept me in my shell, and my secret love for terrible old science fiction movies. He didn't just listen, he understood. He would sit for hours, watching me draw, not with impatience, but with a quiet fascination that made me feel seen in a way I never had before. My apartment, once a solitary fortress, became our shared space. The sound of his laughter became its new soundtrack, and the scent of his sawdust-covered jacket hanging by the door became its new perfume. We went on dates. Simple things. We walked through the park on crisp autumn afternoons, his hand warm and steady in mine. He took me to the massive workshop where he and his partners built custom furniture, the air thick with the rich scent of pine and oak. He showed me the intricate details of a dovetail joint with the same passion he had shown when looking at my art. I took him to my favorite little independent bookstore, and we spent a whole afternoon sitting on the floor in a quiet corner, reading passages to each other from our favorite books. Each shared experience was like laying another brick in the foundation of something solid and real. One Saturday, about 2 months after his staged laundry emergency, I came home to find him in my living room. He had a toolbox open on the floor and was assembling a beautiful, handcrafted bookshelf made of dark walnut. It was elegant and sturdy, designed to perfectly fit the awkward wall next to my desk. I just stood in the doorway, stunned. "What's this?" I asked, a lump forming in my throat. He looked up from his work, a smear of wood stain on his cheek. "Well," he said with a grin, "your books were starting to form a dangerously unstable tower. I figured we needed a more permanent solution." He patted the smooth wood. "Plus, I thought it was time we had something in here that we both built, in a way." And that's when I knew. It was a quiet, certain knowing that settled deep in my bones. This wasn't just a fleeting connection born from a silly lie and a clumsy accident. This was real. This was home. The bookshelf was more than just a piece of furniture. It was a symbol. It was him, building a space for himself in my life, and for me in his. It was strong and beautiful and meant to last. Sometimes I look back on the man I was before that rainy Tuesday, the quiet observer watching life from behind a window. I was safe, yes, but I wasn't truly living. I had convinced myself that connection was a risk I couldn't afford, that vulnerability was a weakness. I never would have guessed that the greatest change in my life wouldn't come from some grand, dramatic event, but from a simple knock on the door and a basket of wet clothes. Caleb taught me that love isn't about protecting yourself from the storm. It's about finding the person who will hold the rope steady while you reach for something higher. It's about being willing to fall, trusting that someone will be there to catch you, or maybe even to fall with you. It turns out that sometimes you have to let someone else's chaos into your carefully ordered world to discover the beautiful, messy, wonderful life you were always meant to live. You just have to be brave enough to open the door.